Hello, my name is José-Carlos Mariátegui from Alta Tecnología Andina, and I have been researching and rescuing for several decades the audiovisual work of Peruvian artist Rafael Hastings, who during the 70s was one of the most prolific audiovisual artists in Latin America. Hastings' explorations began when he emigrated to Europe at the age of 17 to study art in Brussels. And at that time, his interests included film, literature, and choreography, influenced by his friendship with three renowned figures: Maurice Béjart, the innovator of contemporary choreography, François Bellergans, writer and film director, and Jean-Luc Godard, director, screenwriter, and film critic. On his return to Peru in the early 70s, he became actively involved in various audiovisual production projects. In 1973, he established contact with Jorge Glusberg, the founder of the Center for Art and Communication in Buenos Aires, the CAIC, which promoted the internationalization of Latin American video art internationally and distributed Hastings' works. Hastings' visual explorations interrelated diverse practices that complemented each other and can be seen as elements or parts of a great total work of art. During those years, he produced several works. We have been able to rescue 6 films or videos, but there are at least 3 more that are still missing, so we are in the process of rescuing. Although from the 1980s onwards, Hastings devoted himself mainly to painting, he recently, he never discarded video as a means of expression, mainly in some works that had to do with body, with painted bodies, choreography and performance, and many in collaboration with his wife, the choreographer Yvonne von Mollendorf. What I will do now is to introduce the Unconditioned and Concealment, 4 films on the act of vanishing. This was an ambitious production made up of 4 short films: The Island of the Immortals, A Legend from the Time of Hoshi, Unconditioned and Hiding, or An Approximation of the Act of Disappearing. That's the second one. The Legend of 4 Gardens, from an anonymous document collected by Octavio Paz, and The 4 Celestial Poles, from a stone testimony film in Sechín, Casma, in Peru. These were 4 films that, based on the history against the author wishes, the Peruvian government censored some images because of its nudity scenes to allow them to be screened in the theaters. And for almost 50 years, both the original and the censored films were considered lost until I found the original copy in the Spanish Cinematheque in 2021, leading to a careful restoration of the sound and the image. It's important to mention that the film revolves around the death, the idea and the concepts around death, and invites the viewer to cross that path, stopping at uncertain stories about the transcendence of the human. In that sense, the film is based on a particular research by a scholar called Fernando Llosa Porras. He was a scholar of ancient American iconography and imaginary, who in particular studied the symbolism of the archaeological site of Sechín, located in the northern part of Peru. For Llosa Porras, the symbolic of art of Sechín, which also extends to the iconography of other places in Peru, such as Chavín de Huántar or the Nazca and Paracas cultures in the south of Peru, is associated with the mythology of corn growers, of corn harvesters, which were prevalent mostly in Mesoamerican cultures, and particularly they are spotted in the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the creation of the Mayan culture. So Llosa Porras linked such worldview with the primordial tradition, which means the Eastern doctrines that are the product of revelation or inspiration, especially the Taoist and Vedanic ones. And Joseph Porras identified that the essence of certain Eastern myths was also at the heart of the mythology of some Andean cultures and some Mesoamerican cultures, where the same basic elements also existed, such as chaos or barbarism, the search for the establishment or the re-establishment of a lost balance by a mythical figure, also the solar-lunar couple, and the return to a primordial state through a process of transformation. For formal scholars of Peruvian archaeology, Josa's mystic religious ideas had no place, and he was seen as an outsider. But it was precisely because of these elements that this research fascinated Hastings, as well as the percussionist and sound creator Manongo Mujica. And the three of them embarked out in an ambitious audiovisual production which required several weeks of traveling to the south and north of Peru. The films were presented in 1976 in Peru in the Cine Rome or Roma to a small audience, mostly of friends, and they were later also shown in New York and in Peru. As I mentioned before, the film board refused to show them initially because of the inclusion of nudity. So therefore, the producer of the films, Juan Barandarian, made mutilated versions in order to achieve commercial distribution. And however, for 50 years, these films were condemned to oblivion. The copy that Rafael Hastings kept was lost at some stage, and in the case of the copies that were mutilated by the producer, we were informed that these were in complete decay and were discarded. So at the beginning of 2020, a few months before the pandemic, and also a few months before Rafael Hastings passed away, in an informal meeting in his home with his wife and with himself and with Manongo Mujica, the musician, he shared with us the film diary of the 4 short films, which is a beautiful notebook with technical details, notes, and watercolors of the landscape along the way. It's as you will see in these images. It was really I was really fascinated by this travel diary, and it's a beautiful notebook full of technical details, many of which Hastings extracted from specialized magazines. They were also shots linked to the ideas he had prior to the film trip. You will see also here some photos, some shooting ideas, different sceneries, different ideas around how to arrange the scenery. Also, there are several watercolors that he developed along the way, as well as some annotations along with some photos. I mean, it's a beautiful notebook that complements the film, I would say, and drove me to search for the film again. It pushed me again to move and to see how all these audiovisual explorations were also connected to some of the elements of the film. As I mentioned before, I tried to identify the trail of these missing films, of Hastings' missing films overall in different museums and institutions in Latin America, in the US, and in Europe, but we were unable to find the films. And there was a last possibility that I didn't explore initially. Hastings once mentioned that he did the film post-production in a studio in Madrid, Photofilm, where he took the internegative and did all the color and light work. The company, of course, was closed. It was in the 70s, so it doesn't exist anymore, and it has passed to another company. So I attempt to communicate with that company, and they inform us that many of their film assets, they didn't talk specifically about Hastings films. they were sent to the Preservation and Restoration Center of the Spanish Cinematheque. And I then contacted them, the Spanish Cinematheque, and they confirmed me that the negatives were there under the name of Rafael Hastings. So from there we started the negotiation and applied for financial support to the Peruvian Ministry of Culture, who have some grants for preservation of audiovisual and phonographic heritage. Besides that, there was a very interesting work done in terms of post-production. It was done in Spain, which was a condition requested by the Spanish Filmotheque, who are the perpetual custodians of the film materials. And so the work was not easy, because although the 4 films that were edited were found, their conditions were not the best, and some of them were scratched. So what we did is, fortunately, and in addition to the 4 films, there were also some raw footage that Hastings shot. And it was thanks to these raw materials, which were in perfect condition, that it was possible to work on this sort of comprehensive preservation of the material. Interestingly enough, several artificial intelligence techniques that replace elements on some shoots or some flaws of the images were used, and it's much more efficient than many of the traditional frame-by-frame rotoscopies that were done before. Also, it was interesting that when we work in the colorization of the films, today there are very interesting methods of color calibration that didn't exist 50 years ago. So we work in a very meticulous way. It required several days of work. We did it using the Hastings Film Diary, which contain the watercolors and some painted images that made reference to some of the scenery. So what we tried is to get close to that rich and intense colors of the sea, the desert of Peru, the mountains, which allowed also to establish a very particular color palette, which also is prevalent in Hastings' pictorial work. So we were very careful also not to dramatize the images. We tried to think on what Hastings would have done with the technological tools that are available today, without the intention of changing the content in any respect. And as you can see, the result from what we found to what we finally did, it's really impressive. It was, once more, an extremely delicate and patient job. Unfortunately, also the colorist we worked with had lived in Peru, and he also understood the Peruvian landscape and its particular grayness, particularly based on the weather in the coast of Peru. You will see here some of these work in terms of how we colorize the images to expound a little bit more certain colors that we found, some color information that was not seen in the original footage. Perhaps also something that it's interesting to say is that some images that we spotted, like in this case some of the monolith, we spotted that they used some water that was poured in order to generate a greater contrast. So what we did is we also emphasize a little bit that contrast. Hence, what was done with water, today we can make it digitally. In addition to the visual work, the audiovisual post-production, Manongo Mujica, after 50 years, reviewed the content and made a series of improvements, as well as cleaning up the audio. And now it expands with an expression and a sound power that reverberates. And he also added some instruments that mix with the voices and the sounds, and makes a very powerful and expansive film. I would say that also another challenge was that we didn't have an order of the 4 films. So we really had to think extensively about how to make sense of the 4 films. There were no indications about their order, so we studied the possible ways of narrating the story as a linear structure. And after several revisions and looking over and over to the material, I think we found the right way, which is the way in which we are presenting it, which makes sense. Once more, in order to conclude, Hastings' short films are audiovisual speculations in the sense that they seek to connect gaps that were removed from formal history, from formal knowledge, but imagining and inventing possible explanations to phenomena that have a basis in scientific and iconographic research. But the interesting thing about the film is that combines fiction with an unclassifiable fluidity, elements of pre-Columbian history with millenary Oriental legends, and in this way there is a sort of a historical and a speculative reading that is reassembled and disassembled in a way, producing this new space of what I call historical uncertainty, a sort of fiction. But also I think it's very important to mention that when we refer to a restoration, we have to understand that it's not only the identification of the work, the research, the digitalization, but also the subsequent post-production process, which is also a creative way, a creative work, which was guided by the notes left by Hastings, but also was supported by a team of professionals along with Natalia Rey de Castro, Manongo Mujica, and Yvonne von Mollendorf. So we believe that this work is much more relevant today, as the reading for pre-Columbian histories does not deny that there is a link with other cultures. And rather it allows us for a more open exploration of pre-Columbian thought and its link with other millenary cultures. For more information, I'll invite you also to follow the link and visit ATA's website, where there is extensive information about the Rafael Hastings film project. Thank you.